Well, Anna McGovern, welcome to the NACON Australia podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it took us a little bit of time to set up, but I'm really pleased we did because I'm very interested in the organisation that you are heading up or a spokesperson for, and that's the Women's Safety Initiative. What is that exactly, and what do you do?
Yes, so I'm the Deputy Director for the Women's Safety Initiative, and our mission statement is to expose the dangers of uncontrolled immigration, put women and girls first, advocate for victims, and demand real solutions. So this came about 2 months ago now. Jessica, she's the founder, came to me with this concept. We already know that there is something that exists like this in France called Collective Nemesis, who are a similar initiative, but for France, French girls, and she came up with the idea of setting something up similar in the UK, and asked me if I'd be interested in helping her getting this set up, which I agreed. I was very enthusiastic because we didn't have anything like this exist for us in the UK, and I think it's something that's incredibly important, and women feel that they could be represented. So at the beginning of the WSI, it was only four of us who helped with setting it up and then putting it out there to the public, which was, I believe, around April now. And we are now on 31,000 followers, or might be 32,000 actually now on X. And we've raised thousands of pounds of donations as well. And it's just grown bigger than we could have possibly imagined, which I think for many people is because there wasn't anything like this that exists. And for women who feel at danger by immigration, they felt like finally there is an organization that represents their interests and they can finally feel like they're being heard. So that's how the organization started off. And since we've had a couple of events, we've had some rallies as well. We've set up we've called them chapters, which is local led groups across the UK. So women can, from the WSO, they can meet each other and organise at a grassroots level as well. And we've just launched our first campaign as well. So yeah, been a very busy couple of months of getting it set up, but it's been incredibly exciting.
Well, it's a great angle to highlight the risks of mass immigration. There's clearly a demand for it. What has been the political response so far?
I think politically we've had support from both sides, because I think what's important about WSI as well is we're not a politically motivated organisation. Women who join our organisation, they may come from different political backgrounds, might have different beliefs politically, but we are focused specifically on the issue of immigration and how that directly impacts women and girls, and putting women and girls first and protecting their safety. So that's gathered support from both sides. And one of our organisers is actually a former Labour councillor, now turned independent. So we've had support from both of those sides, which has been exciting. And I think we've, so for example, Rupert Lowe, he's a very popular member of Parliament here in the UK. He has been very vocal in his support of us. He's regularly sharing, our content. He's met with a few of our members as well. So he's been very supportive. And yet we see support from both sides of the political spectrum, which has been good. I think people can see that this is an incredibly important issue.
Mm. Why wasn't the current legal framework sufficient? I mean, why weren't what specifically are you trying to put in place that isn't there at the moment?
Well, I think what we're seeing at the moment, what's caused a lot of problems here in the UK, is that immigration is at such a high exponential scale that and this directly impacts women and girls as well, because it's putting more people in danger. And when, in particular as well, which we've highlighted, is that when you're importing people from a certain culture en masse that do not respect women and girls, you're going to see an uptick
Mm.
in crimes against women and girls, which is what we've seen. And it's left feeling, women and girls are very unsafe. So that's what we exist to do at the WSI. We raise awareness of those issues. We have a spokeswoman a platform as well, which is where we provide support for women who want to share their story and help them do that in a safe way, supportive way, and raise awareness of their story and what's happened to them if they're willing to do that, and provide them support in doing that. So.
Mm. Well, there's certainly been a lot of attention on the UK recently, because of the grooming gangs, so-called grooming gangs, really rape gang scandal in the UK. And there was a report recently, I think the Casey report, right, which actually has seemed to have resulted in some more. Well, it's a review. Let's see what would actually happen after that. But your focus is more on, then that's very, very important, obviously. But your focus is more on the general safety of young women in going to work in the UK that no longer feel that their security is what it once was, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think for me personally, I've had many situations where I felt unsafe. For example, a few years ago, when I was walking back home from work late at night, it was a less than 10-minute walk. I was followed home, and then just as I was about to turn the corner towards my house, I felt someone grab me from in between my legs and almost tried to lift me. And I turned around.
Is it in London, or which city
So
was
this
that?
this was just out, so not too far. It's a place called Rochester, which is in
Oh, yeah.
Medway. It's got about 40, I believe, about 45 minutes on the train to London.
Mm,
And anyway, so turn around and scream in shock. And this man starts speaking in a foreign language that I don't understand and blowing kissing faces at me. And I had to run to get out of that situation. And then when I had reported this to the police, I then found out there were 5 or 6 other girls, who had been through similar situations in the local area with this individual that I had. And then after 2 years, he finally did get deported, but it took 2 years for that process to happen. And then many other women that I've met as well who've been involved with the WSI or even day to day,
mm,
almost every single one has a similar story where they felt unsafe. So this is definitely becoming an increasing issue, and what we hope to do at the WSI is to raise awareness on that.
mm. Yeah, I lived in Asia for a time, and there were lots of British people there, and it was striking that the girls would say, "Oh, it's really quite relaxing. I can walk around any part of Hong Kong at any time of night without any real fear for my safety." And 50 years ago in the UK, that was also the case. But now just people just assume that, well, you got to put your head down and keep your wits about you, and like hide your mobile phone in your purse, or God knows what it was. Is the problem with men, or with specifically immigrant men? Because I often find in the commentary tends to be a tendency to avoid the immigrant angle and focus on how bad men are, supposedly in general.
So recently, the Casey report was published, and
Mm,
one big chapter which is called denial. So I think what she found and what has now prompted an inquiry is, so I've also got some interesting data. So 2/3 of perpetrators do not have their ethnicity recorded in that. So those are the offenders. But she did take evidence from 3 police forces in the north of England, which was South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, and Greater Manchester Police. And then after speaking to those forces, she said there was enough evidence to suggest that there was a disproportionate number of offenders from Pakistani and Asian heritage backgrounds.
mm,
And I think a lot of the fear as well is, and when she spoke, when victims have spoken out as well, there was a fear of, from those in power about speaking on those issues because of the ethnicity and potential accusations of being called racist. Which has been, and I think that's why there's been such a failure in supporting victims, and with a lot of that fear as well of the accusations being called racist, and for other women as well in potentially even coming forward, they are fearful because they might not get that support. They might. So there's been, yeah. So I think with the Casey report that's come out, there's been a lot of damning evidence that has come through, and now that has brought forward that inquiry. And I think with our Labour government as well, that there's you can no longer put your head in the sand. It's time to get those questions answers that people desperately need.
What about in response to your organisation from the Labor Party in the UK? Because they had a big landslide election. They are in power. How do they view you guys?
Um, Sorry, excuse me. We're a fairly new organisation,
Mm,
so I think we've only been about for a couple of months. We are happy to work with anyone who is, who's willing to listen to us, so we can make a difference for women and for girls. So that would include working with those from the Labour Party or from the opposition. We're willing to work with those. We have seen cross-party political support, and we're continuing to grow. We're continuing to, find new projects and areas to focus on. So the Labour government would be included in that as well. We would be happy to work with them
mm.
to make a difference for women and girls.
I understand why you want to be nonpartisan, and there are people from across the political spectrum that will lend a sympathetic ear. Do you think, in general, though, the the political left have been less keen to address issues like the consequences of mass immigration on, public safety for women? The grooming gang scandal, I think, occurred in predominantly Labor held seats. There's famously on other issues, it's been the left predominantly, with some honourable exceptions, like J.K. Rowling and others who've not wanted to defend the definition of woman, or defend, um, uh, women who are girls who are given unnecessary gender treatments. Is Why do you think that is? Because usually it's the left that purport to be the ones who are so, pro women and the like.
Yeah, for a start, I would absolutely agree that there is a bias on the left where they are, putting their heads in the sand, and if you speak up on those issues, you're immediately a racist. I know for me personally, I'm a journalist and I cover these issues as well, and I commentate on them, I share them on social media, and I've been called the most horrific things, even for just presenting the story, even just raising awareness on those facts, even
Mm.
so far as to calling me a Nazi for raising awareness of those issues, which is
Oh, yeah.
absolutely horrendous. So there is definitely, I would say there is definitely that bias towards, for some people, there's that uncomfortable truths coming forward, where it's like, if you're speaking about a disproportionate of number of offenders coming from a certain ethnicity, you're branded as a racist. But then if you're talking about offences that come from white people, they don't have a problem with that. So I would agree there is that bias. But then I think also as well, now that more evidence is coming forward, now we're seeing more data come through, now we're hearing more stories. I think people from both sides are starting to see that this is a problem, and you can't just disregard this as, and just call it racist when just facts speak for themselves.
Mm. I think sometimes Australia can be more forthright on issues and can get ahead of the UK, at least from my perspective, like sort of legal immigration and the like. Um, but sometimes where you guys are ahead. And I think in recent times, with the Cass report and then the Casey report, there's been a lot more forthright discussion, I think, from a distance, about some of the issues which, at least in Australia, we're still sort of trying to avoid. What about the response from the corporate world? Because any, FTSE 100 company is keen to stress how, pro women they are, and how they're keen to, you know, promote women and cater to women and all the rest of it. You would think that women's safety of their staff would be important, and you're involved in that. Have you received much outreach from those in the corporate world?
Well, I think obviously we're in the early stages of our organisation, and I think what we've essentially said is that we're happy to work with anyone who sees what we're trying to do within our mission, and believes also in what we believe in protecting women and girls, and whether that's from the political side, those for people in power, those from the corporate world, we are willing to work across
Mm,
different sectors, and find talk to people and find out more ways that we can protect women and girls. We've also had meetings as well with people, those in like for example people who've spoken widely about these issues, survivors, those
mm,
in positions of power, just to see how we can inform our mission even more, and ways that we can keep improving and keep building on the work that we're doing in protecting women and girls. So yeah, we are in the early stages in our the foundation of our organisation, but we've got lots of different plans, and I think
mm.
it's going to be a very exciting time for WSI.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just curious because I suspect the corporate world maybe a little bit think the issue is a bit too hot in some ways, and you might get resistance from that. But who knows? Hopefully, they'll recognize the virtue of it. You spent time in Australia, right?
Mhm.
How would you? Uh, what would be your impression about the the risks to public safety for women like yourself in the same major capital cities compared to the UK? Better or worse or the same or what?
Well, I was quite surprised actually, because in some respects it was the same, and in it's depending on certain areas, in some cases even worse than what I'd experienced before. So I lived in Australia for almost a year, and for about almost 3 months I was living in Bacchus Marsh, which is not too
Oh
far
yeah,
from
yep.
Melbourne. Yeah, and for some working holiday visa. I'm from the UK, so it didn't apply to me. From other countries, to qualify for your working holiday visa, you need to do a certain number of time in like farm work.
Mm,
And where
mm.
I lived, there was a lot of foreign farm workers locally, and what I'd heard from someone that I knew working there is that a lot of them, they're given massive knives, and that according to them they carry them around with them everywhere, even when they're not working. And I remember once being in a park a little while back when I was living in Bacchus Marsh in Australia, and and there was a number of them there, and they'd actually stolen my phone while I wasn't looking. And then I realized that it was gone, and I came back to confront them, and they went from speaking perfect English to not being able to understand me, but they had stolen my phone. And then I managed to track it or find my iPhone, and it had been located back at the farm. And I did call the police, but there wasn't really much that they could do, and I never got my phone back. So I remember at the time I did a public post on Facebook, and I in the, I think it was like one of those local community groups, and I said
Mm.
about what had happened. There were also other complaints as well, that this particular group had also trashed the park, and it was just left in a complete mess. And the farm that I'd, when I'd written about this, they were apparently very upset. They're very upset that I'd named them. But at the end of the day, this was like a big group of them, and they were responsible. So yeah, and in London, comparatively in London, we have a lot of these issues as well. With
Mm.
the phone thefts every single day, and once your phone is gone, you're never getting that back. And generally, and there's very little that the police could do in those situations. And I think comparatively in Australia, I was quite surprised that we saw, I saw a similar situation as well, and I felt very unsafe in that circumstance. So
Mm.
I think, yeah, both sides definitely a big problem in this.
The ethnic mix is slightly different compared with Australia. We don't have the Pakistani. I mean, it's changing, but we
Mhm.
haven't had the sort of generational mix that you guys have had there. In your that situation, if you don't mind me saying, which ethnic background were the perpetrators from?
Honestly, I can't remember
Mm.
exactly where they were from. I could probably find it after this interview. I could
Yeah,
probably
so
find where they were from, but I think, yeah, I would agree that the problem probably the background of the problems that we have in the UK are
Mm,
different than what is,
mm.
in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just before getting on, I was reading a quote, from George Orwell, who said, "Till recently, it was thought proper to pretend that all human beings are very much alike, but in fact, anyone able to use his eyes knows that the average human behavior differs enormously from country to country." It's sort of an obvious truth, but the whole public policy in the West of the last 30 years has sort of not accepted that, you know, when people come, obviously many excellent immigrants, but there's a large proportion that do have different mores, and one of those is the way they view women. Do you think there's any signs that there's going to be real change in the UK with regard to um, immigration, mass immigration, and the problems that it causes?
Well, I think what we're seeing in the UK is a lot of sound bites from,
Mm,
politicians where they say they will tackle it and then they never do. I mean, well,
mm,
for example, the Conservative government, they had years and years to tackle this issue and they failed. And, I do so I'm not sure if you've heard of Robert Jenrick, but
yeah, no,
he's
I've seen him, and I've been impressed with him actually. But
yeah, I've been very impressed with his approach, and as in a very hard hitting, very powerful.
mm,
However, I do, given that the Conservatives were in power last, I just wonder how much has actually changed. I remember around the time of the general election, I was, I'm a former Conservative supporter, and I did think that they needed to lose because I think they needed time to actually go in the back benches and reassess who they are as a party. And I
mm,
think if you've got someone like Robert Jenrick taking the charge, there is hope for them.
mm,
And I think what we're also seeing from Labour is now Keir Starmer has started becoming very hard hitting in terms of sound bites when it comes to
mm,
immigration. But then what we're seeing is such a large scale, and particularly like legal immigration as well, coming into this country. So you've got a lot of talk about how they're going to tackle it and the dangers of it, and they're not going to have it, but we're still seeing this in the UK. So I don't personally believe a lot of the sound bites that you hear where they'll just talk
mm,
about the dangers of immigration, how it's out of control. What I want to see is action, and I think
mm,
that's what a lot of people want to see as well. They don't want to just hear the talk; they want people to
yeah.
actually act and do something about it.
Mm. Yeah, there's been tough talk before by British and other European leaders. I remember way back, this must have been David Cameron's time, right? When he said multiculturalism has failed, and Nicolas Sarkozy said multiculturalism has failed, and Angela Merkel said multiculturalism has failed. But then nothing changed very much. They still had, welcomed Syrian refugees, or up the numbers in the UK dramatically. How did you become? I'm not going to say radicalized, but interested in this particular issue.
I think for me, I could I've been interested in politics and
Mm,
involved in the sphere for the last few years now, and I've personally been impacted by the dangers of immigrant, mass immigration. And as I said earlier on, when you're importing people from culture en masse that do not respect women, you're
mm,
going to see an upscale of these crimes against women. And I think for me, I could, having been personally affected by it and having and knowing people as well who've been directly impacted by this too, I think there is that tendency from those in power to bury their heads in the sand and not actually, take accountability or call it out for what it is.
mm,
And I think for me, I'm in a position where I am able to, raise awareness of these issues. So I do, and I do my best. And I think for me, I just see that this is incredibly important, and this is something that needs to be talked about and for action to actually take place. So I think for me, that's probably where the interest had originated, and with the WSI as well. I hope that we can continue to hold those in power to account, raise awareness of those issues, and protect women and girls.
mm. There's sort of been a structural issue in making this, being able to talk about this issue in the press, because often those affected, poor girls in Rotherham and the rest of it, don't have media platforms, or they're not able to present as well or explain it in the terms that, I don't know, would be palatable to a BBC sort of studio presenter, right? So, but again, I think in the UK, you guys are making more headway more generally
Mm,
than is the case in Australia, and being able to punch through and talk about it much more frankly than is the case here.
mm.
Uh, yeah, is that like? Is that Why do you think that is? Is it simply because it's become so bad, or is it because that there has been a bit of a uh, I don't know, groups that have got together like yourself, or who have been those that have sort of really pushed through and made it possible for others to speak? Do you think?
Well, I've met people as well that they've said that they want to talk about these issues and speak publicly, but they're in fear of their jobs or, if their workplace scene, the content that they've engaged with or about public posts. I've met people who've lost their jobs over holding certain political stances, which I personally think that whatever your politics are, that it shouldn't impact it should impact your workplace should be getting involved. That's my personal opinion on that. I know with the WSI as well, that's why we do have a mechanism where members can remain anonymous as well, so they can still get involved, but without having to, be public or
Mm.
like be named or anything like that. If they believe in the issue, but they're not in a position to do that. So we do understand that not everyone is in that position where they can speak publicly. I think if you are able to, then do it. I know for me, that's why I've been quite forthcoming and vocal about these issues,
Mm.
because I am in a position where I am able to do that, but not everyone is, which is a shame. I think though, I think now that a lot of these issues are coming to light, and from people from both sides of the political spectrum are starting to see the scale of the problem here. I think that there has been, that's why again with the Labour government, there's now all of a sudden there's a lot of noise about immigration, a lot of these sound bites that you hear. I think Keir Starmer's tweeting, or his team anyway, is tweeting quite regularly about the problems. But again, I won't believe it until we see some actual concrete action on this.
Yeah. Uh, Crudely, in political terms, it's
Mhm.
really a competition between um, people like yourself in Middle England, I suppose, and then many of the ethnic groups that, at least the perception is that if there's any criticism of this issue too much, they will vote for, well, they won't vote for the Labour Party. They might vote for I think there's a new Muslim-based party there, or they'll vote for someone else, right? How do you convince some of the ethnic communities that this is a winner for them too?
Well, I think for some of those communities, I think even those with the same like heritage background that we see
Mm,
in the upscale of these offences from, they're horrified that we're not saying every single one is
no, of
responsible or
course not.
complicit, because some of them not the same, like highly radicalized, and they
Mm,
can see the issue and they're horrified like we are. So I think so again, now the lid has been blown off and a lot of these issues are coming to light. We're seeing a lot of this data come through. We're seeing more people coming forward
mm.
with their stories. I think that's why a lot of people from different backgrounds are starting to see the scale of the issue and that it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. What other lessons you started off, I think it was inspired by this, collective nemesis. How have they gone? I mean, what lessons have you learnt from them? Because they've been around a bit longer.
Mm. So we first heard about, I remember first hearing about Collective Nemesis in France. So they're a similar organisation to what we are, but they're
Mm,
French women who are involved and they're raising awareness of the scale of immigration as well. I mean, I remember last year when I was in Paris and I've been there a few times, but I remember the last time that I went, even just walking around, I didn't feel very safe. It was a very different atmosphere to what I remember in the
Yeah.
past. And I remember before I went as well, I saw a lot of videos about, particularly in Paris, about a lot of the different scams that are out there, the way that they target tourists. I remember seeing one, for example, where there was a lady with a clipboard and she was pretending to be a charity for deaf children. But I think there's a lot of there was a lot of misspellings in the form. But then what they do, they target tourists to donate to them, but it's obviously not a real charity. It's a scam, and similar things like that. And I think with Collective Nemesis, what they exist to do is very similar to what we do, but focusing particularly on France and the issues that France have and how to protect women and girls in France. And what they do in Collective Nemesis was extremely successful. I met them a couple of times now. They've come over to the UK for different events and had really good conversations about what they were doing. And then we thought it was time to set up something similar in the UK, where we do, a similar thing, but it's raising awareness on what we're facing here in the UK and how do we protect women and girls in the UK. And I think that's since inspired potentially like other countries to set up similar mechanisms across the world. So
Yeah.
I think again, a lot of people can see that this is a really important issue, and they're responding.
Yeah, I've seen some of the things from Collective Nemesis, and there is that feisty French sort of attitude, because, and you can really see the clash between the traditional, let's call it Bridget Bardot kind of um, mode of life that the French women are used to living, and the incredibly different attitudes, let's say, that the communities from North Africa and
Mhm.
elsewhere have. And it's not clear to me that any sort of public education campaign will really shift those attitudes of those immigrants, right? And I think that I mean, is it possible to sort of through programs in schools change the attitudes of some of these communities in the UK and elsewhere that have have very different attitudes to to those that we're used to in the West?
I would be very skeptical about that in schools, because then because then you're I think what I would fear as well. I think the idea in itself is a good concept, but then
Mm,
I would who would be in charge of that. And then you've got what we've seen as well in certain schools is pushing of certain agendas and political agendas onto
yeah,
young children. I think particularly as well, LGBTQIA plus, on very young children who are too
mm,
young to understand
yeah.
um, the or the whole issue. We have seen in the past where this has been pushed. That I would wonder if a school is the right place for that to happen. I personally think it starts at home. I think parents can also take an active role in that. So I think if that was to happen, it would have to be done very, very carefully.
Yeah, I mean, you had recently in the UK and in Australia too that Netflix series Adolescence, where right, which was a white, 14 or whatever boy, and he was presented as the real risk to women and girls in the UK, when statistically it's sort of, I think people have done the analysis, is it was almost impossible for that person to
Yeah.
be it. And yet it was a national thing where the Keir Starmer was in Parliament, and I think everyone was forced to watch it. But that's not the real risk. But you would never see, I don't know, a similar, it's Netflix series focusing on, I don't know, depraved types in formerly industrial parts of the UK who are committing, atrocious crimes with an ethnic background, right?
Exactly, and, I just so they have now I think what they've now pushed is for all schools, to play adolescents to children, and
Yeah.
I remember watching it, it was just pushing a certain agenda, and I wonder if the star of the show was from one of the heritage backgrounds for those that disproportionately commit, more of these crimes. If he was the star of the show, I wonder if Keir Starmer would then be pushing for schools to play that, and the answer is no. But I think because it is a young white boy, it's very I think, yeah, what, young boys as well, they get a lot of flack, they get demonized, and is it a lot I think it's a lot harder, especially, like, in the UK as well, and especially with this agenda that's being pushed forward.
Mm.
So, I think it's very easy for them to, push this agenda. So it's white men, it's white boys, and they have no problem in demonizing them, but then when you're actually raising awareness of those issues from those heritage who disproportionately commit more of these offences, that's an uncomfortable truth. And to raise awareness of that, you would be called racist. So yeah, if the star of the show, if it was more to the book, if it was more truthful, I don't think we would have seen the same response that we did in Parliament. And then also one thing as well, I remember watching a BBC interview with Kemi Badenoch,
Mm.
and the BBC presenters were pushing her saying, "Have you watched Adolescence?" And she said, "No, I've been spending time in my constituency and doing work as a member of parliament." And then they were almost outraged at the fact, how could you not have watched Adolescence? Like the shock, the horror. And it's very clear to me that that Netflix show was very much about pushing a certain agenda. It's because of Andrew Tate and all of that. So it was really pushing a message forward in that, when without actually looking about the full truth behind why we're seeing the scale of these crimes.
Yeah, I kind of wonder why that is, why these things sort of catch fire. One is simply they don't want to take the heat for describing the issues as they are and the real risks. Is it something also to do with a class issue where you can, um, middle class mums and the like, or women are happy to discuss adolescence and,
Mhm.
worry about their children and bad Andrew Tate and all the rest of it,
Mm.
but they're not actually, in many cases, exposed to the real risks of ethnic gangs in the Midlands and stuff, and so it's more of an abstraction to them, and so there's a disconnect, isn't there, between, some of the harms? I mean, I'm trying to be very charitable. Maybe
Yeah.
they know what the real reason is, but they don't pretend otherwise. But I don't think that's always the case. That's what's going on. They just don't kind of they just they don't have any direct experience with predominantly Pakistani grooming
Mm.
gangs, and so their real risk is something else, and therefore the chattering classes, or the upper middle class who are BBC presenters and the like, or in Westminster, they that's more of an issue for them, even though it's a sort of smaller issue in the country at large.
Well, and I think again what we're seeing as well is that talking about ethnicity and what ethnicity of the perpetrators that commit these
Mm,
offences, they are uncomfortable truths,
mm,
and to call it out for what it is would deem you racist. That's why in the recent Casey report, it's recorded like reported 2/3 of the perpetrators did not have their ethnicity reported,
yeah.
which damning. And
And that's
so
weird
again,
because whenever you fill in, why is that? Because whenever you fill in anything in the corporate world, they're always asking whether you identify as, Caucasian or this, that, and the other. So you're always providing ethnic data, but in this case, the police, why do they not record it?
well, so as well, when they've spoken to survivors, there was a fear again for the police forces that of being deemed as racist.
Mm,
Even though a lot of these crimes were now, especially now more evidence is coming out, more of this data is coming forward, people are speaking up. They do come from like Pakistani heritage in particular,
yeah.
like these offenders. And I think again, so as we were saying before, so for example, with adolescents, it's very easy to demonize white men, white boys. They have no fear of calling them out or making them look like the bad guys. But then, as soon as it's from a different heritage, all of a sudden you're being called racist, even though we're
Mm.
seeing a disproportionate number of these crimes committed by those people from those different backgrounds. So I think it just comes down to the fear of being called racist for calling out the issues for what they are.
And it's not only two-tier treatment in the media, but there's also it seems two-tiered policing in the UK increasingly, right?
Mhm.
Where uh, particular crimes are ignored, but then if someone says, I think there's a famous case, Lucy Connolly, a lady who, after the Southport, horrific massacre, she tweeted something, you know, unsavory, but nothing, from what I saw, nothing too bad. And then she deleted it a couple of hours later, and she's been imprisoned. And it just seems completely disproportionate to the supposed crime that was committed. Even if, I don't think it even should be considered a crime. What explains that? I mean, um, yeah, like I said, two tiered type of policing. What's driving it?
So in the case of Lucy Connolly, she'd tweeted something. So it was an offensive tweet, but
Mm,
nothing that warranted the time she's now serving in prison. She was
yeah.
certainly made an example of as a result
Mm,
of the sample rise. But she tweeted something, and then as she went on a walk, reflected on what she tweeted, and took it down within a few hours.
mm,
But then afterwards, she's now been locked up in prison. She's away from her husband, from their child as well, for a tweet. And I think what the most shocking thing as well to me is that so for example, what I've spoken about before, there was a former MP, Mike Hammersbury. He was physically attacking one of his own constituents on the
mm,
street at night, with the other members of the public having to intervene to stop him from doing that. And he, I believe he got a suspended sentence, but he's certainly not serving any time now in prison for what he's done, and that's for physical violence. Yet you've got Lucy Colony, who has no criminal record either, and she's a mother, and she's now, she's away from her family. She's now serving over 2 years in prison for a deleted tweet, which I just think is absolutely ludicrous, and she was definitely made an example out of in that case.
And what explains that? I mean, surely, to me, from a distance, I've been following it somewhat. Just seems like a complete outrage. Are there not people demanding her release, or is the Prime Minister not being called to give a statement in the Commons about how this can be allowed?
So, I think so. There's been a lot of outrage from the public. A lot of people that I believe there's a bit of fundraiser that's actually been set up in her name, raising money towards,
Mm,
for example, a legal case and towards her family as well. And I think that's accumulated a lot of donations, and I think
mm.
that's because people are utterly shocked about her treatment. And there was an appeal recently where they were trying to get her sentence reduced, and unfortunately, she's still in prison. And I think in the case of Lucy, she was made an example out of. I believe as well, she was advised at the time to plead guilty because it would mean that she gets a lesser sentence. And I think so. On the whole, I think it was absolutely outrageous. I think what she tweeted was not sensible. It was in itself offensive, but it doesn't mean that, I don't think that then warrants you being locked away for years in prison, where there's people who do far worse and get far less if they get any time in prison at all.
Well, it's just that the irony of you know mass rape that have occurred in the UK for a long period of time that are being ignored compared to, you know, mum being knocked up for something offensive, which,
Yeah, like,
yeah, it doesn't make any
shocking.
sense. What do you think is the solution? I mean, you can reduce immigration, you can police better, but how is it realistic to expect that the attitudes in some of these ethnic communities will change over time naturally, or what else can be done?
So I saw, for example, I saw a quite interesting story from the Telegraph, which I'm just going to read out.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
asylum seekers have been told by police to treat women with respect and not harass them or risk being arrested. So, officers have drawn up a PowerPoint presentation for
Oh,
asylum
lovely. Yep.
quota on the key points of UK culture, which they are told they should respect. It includes recognising that women have the same rights as men, so must be treated with respect and courtesy. If you harass or abuse any female, you could be arrested, it states. So the fact is that they've had to put that in a PowerPoint presentation and spell it out for them in black and white. If you're, if you're simulated into this culture from the UK, you know that this is just, but for me, I'm reading that as basic common sense. But for these people who come from cultures that do not respect women, have to be taught this in black and white PowerPoint presentations how to respect women, which I think as well that I think in itself. If you are, that shouldn't kind of behavior should not be tolerated in this country. And the
And
fact of the
how effective is that gonna be too? I mean, these peop these cultural sort of biases are deep-seated. They're not gonna be changed by like like a software update or a
Mhm.
or a or like you say, a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, that's
Well,
almost
yeah,
mm.
I completely agree. I don't think that's going to work whatsoever. I think is if it has to be said in a PowerPoint presentation how to in black and white treat women, I don't think that's necessarily going to be an effective, effective way of educating these people. And that's again why um when you're importing a culture en masse that disrespects women, don't see women in the same way, and you, obviously when you're not from in the UK, it's just completely different culture. This does not have to necessarily be spelt out like this in black and white, but when you're importing that culture en masse that don't respect women, again, you're going to see more of these crimes. You're going to see more women feeling unsafe in their communities.
Yeah, it's almost as though I think the bureaucracies in the West, while they purport to be very sensitive about culture, actually don't understand culture. Like, they don't understand cultural differences at a deep level. They think they're simply, whatever, different types of food, but basic assumptions about treatment of women and other things are the same across and it's just not it's just clearly not the case. It's almost like physician heal thyself. The bureaucrats need to need to better understand culture themselves in a way, right? There are parts of the UK that are still, um, safe and outside the bigger cities, right? It's still more pleasant. No, it's
To be honest, I think it also if you've got London, I think London now is the hotspot of a lot of these crimes. I know, like, personally for me and for people that I know, when you go to London, you feel a lot more unsafe. I've
yeah.
had my phone stolen in London, for example. I was sat in a Starbucks working, and so a foreign man came up to me, started speaking in a foreign language, and what he starts doing is literally waving a newspaper right in my face, and I didn't know what was going on at the time, and I was sort of very, telling him to be like, back off, go away, get away from me. He's like almost right on top of me, and then he runs for it, and I realized though the newspaper was a distraction technique to take my phone, while he had while he was covering my face with this newspaper, and he ran for it, and then as it happened so fast, I realized instantly, but he was gone. Fortunately, I did actually manage to get my phone back in that circumstance
Okay.
because find my iPhone was on my phone. And I know in terms of like the police, for a lot of people who get their phone stolen in London, if your phone is stolen, generally it's gone, and like there's not much that the police can do. But fortunately, they turned on my phone, and it went on for like, I think a couple of minutes, and it tracked the address. And fortunately, my dad was working nearby the address,
All right.
over, and that was very, very brave of him to do because you don't know who you're going to be met
Mm,
at the door, and but I think fortunately they were just so shocked that they'd been caught out. They actually gave my phone back, and they're
yeah.
apparently bragging to my dad, "Oh yeah, we sold it for £200," and all of this, so which was again pretty shocking, and they'd taken the SIM out and everything. And had he not done that, my phone would have probably been put in parts in a different country. But then there's other people as well, the bikes, that you've got a lot of, like, the bikes around in London. I remember once walking back from doing an appearance on Talk TV, and there were about 7 or 8 people with balaclavas on their faces just, cycling around really fast nearby me. And I remember then a police officer pulling up in his car, and he said, "Oh, I just wanna let you know you're being surrounded by people and bikes, so you might want to start walking quickly." And then he just drove off. And it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. They're all like cycling around. I was like, "Great, thank you." I've just been just been told
This has
that.
been but where you had your phone stolen, that was in relatively central London, where you were surrounded with the bikes, that was, near the TV studios as well, relatively central?
So yeah, both circumstances, they were in central London,
Mm,
and I know I've heard stories from other people as well, where they've been on their phone or they've just had it out for literally a second, and they just cycle past and snatch it out of your hand. I remember I read a story today. There was a woman in her 70s outside the West End, in London, where there was a gang of them that had kicked her from behind her leg and then took her bag and stole her stuff. So I think for a lot in London, there is a hot spot for a lot of this crime, and that's why a lot of people feel very unsafe going around there. I know, particularly for me, when I was staying there for quite a bit at one point, I felt very, very nervous, especially at night being around London, because you see a lot
yeah.
of this activity, and the police don't do. There's not a lot that the police can do about it.
Yeah, and yet there's CCTV cameras everywhere and supposedly, no tolerance for tweets or anything else, but there's
Mm.
tolerance for all this sort of activities. Hey, Anna, I try to keep these things to an hour. If people want to find out more about your work and donate to you or support you or potentially set up a branch in Australia or elsewhere, which I think is probably be a good idea, and I've spoken to some people about it, how do they get in touch and what do they do?
Well, firstly, if anyone's watching from different countries, including Australia, and you want support in setting up a similar women's safety initiative, get in touch, and we'll be very happy to help support you in doing that. So we're Women's Safety underscore UK on X, and we're also on Instagram and TikTok as well. We've got our website, which I'll provide the link for after this. Maybe something could be put
I'll drop it in the show notes. Yep.
put on the screen. And we've also got a GoFundMe page set up as well. So that goes towards the work that we do, the research, and in providing support for women and girls as well. And all of the work that we do across the board. So if you wish to support us, you can donate on our GoFundMe page.
Awesome. I'm a big fan. When I was reading about the Women's Safety Initiative, reminded me of a famous passage in Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, which describes a confrontation between the revolutionary, bloodthirsty Madame Defarge and the no-nonsense, patriotic English governess Miss Pross. And in the scene, the latter famously says, "You might from your appearance be the wife of Lucifer," says Miss Pross. "Nevertheless, you shall not get the better of me. I am an English woman." And I thought,
Mm.
oh, the sort of spirit that you guys embody in the organization, that it's,
Mm.
enough of this rot. It's time to stick up for what we know is good and right. And I wish you every success. And like I said, we'll try and see if I know there are people interested in doing something similar in Australia because we do have similar issues. Thanks very much, Anna. Great to speak, and look forward to catching up in the future.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.